I never believed that my simple rainwater collection system would land me in all-out war with my HOA when they started stealing my water for their precious garden. How did I know it would end on a dramatic note with their entire office underwater? The first drops hit my new rain barrels with a plink. After months of pinching, I'd finally installed a full system to water my vegetable garden without running up my bills. 5 connected barrels would be able to store enough water to see us through our dry spells. I literally danced as the spring shower filled them, or should have filled them 3 storms later. Something wasn't adding up. My barrels were barely a quarter full. Despite the heavy rainfall, I crawled under my deck along the gutter lines and found something that made my blood boil. Someone had run diversion pipes I never approved. I was still on my knees in the mud when a shadow fell across me. Miss Reynolds, president of the Pinerist Village HOA, hovered on the line of my property with clipboard and signature scowl. "Mr. Jackson," she called, not going to the trouble of waiting for me to rise from the chair. "Your garden beds are 6 inches outside of your authorized landscaping plan." I cleaned mud from off my knees. "Remember my garden beds who installed these pipes on my gutters?" She looked up at the pipes with professional detachment. "The association made the necessary adjustments to all corner properties. If you'd attended last month's meeting, you'd know we voted to maximize water allocation." "Maximize? You're stealing my rainwater." "Don't be melodramatic," she sighed, pointing to something on her clipboard under bylaw. 72.3 All excess precipitation resources belong to community spaces. Your collection system wasn't approved by the architectural committee anyway. 2 maintenance workers in association uniforms appeared behind her, nodding as if this were completely understandable. "I never assented to this," I said, upon as began walking down along my boundary line. The diversion system was advanced tiny channels that were hidden with landscaping rocks, flowed into larger pipes which disappeared into the earth. "Majority rules, Mr. Jackson, the community garden needs scheduled irrigation." I remembered that garden, a sparkling showpiece immediately behind the HOA office, that I'd expressly refused to fund through raised monthly dues. My blood pressure increased higher. "You're charging me more in arrears while pilfering resources for my property." My voice grew despite my efforts to keep calm. Mrs. Reynolds was confronted, cold stares directed at me. "Watch your tone, you're already racking up infractions this quarter." As they walked away, I followed the underground pipe network to its terminus. The posh garden they irrigated largely served board members' properties, like Miss Reynolds' pristine colonial, with its picture-perfect view of the manicured area back home. I called the city water department, who said rainwater rights were complicated and typically governed by HOA contracts. I'd need to read my same thick document that most likely contained that mysterious bylaw. 72.3 While digging through my papers, someone knocked opening the door, had a bright yellow violation notice, and $300 penalty for unauthorized landscape changes and aggressive behavior towards association representatives. That evening, sleep refused to fall through my bedroom window. I watched the sprinklers activate in the community garden, wastefully spraying water everywhere despite the day's rainfall. My stolen rainfall. My phone vibrated with a text from my neighbor Marcus. "Spotted Reynolds at your place? You all right?" I responded back. "They're taking my rainwater for their garden." His reply was quick. "Not only yours? Come over tomorrow. Bring your HOA contract." The following day, Marcus's dining table vanished under papers, property maps, HOA bylaws, and water drainage plans. Marcus had fought the association over solar panel installation the previous year, and one glance he pointed to section 72.3. This provision concerning excess precipitation was introduced last year, technically without due notice. It's not legally binding. Can we challenge it alone? Tough. But I've been talking to other neighbors. Eleanor down the road is a retired hydraulic engineer. She's been keeping records of the board's doings for years. That afternoon, Eleanor's kitchen was our war room. At 72, she had fire in her eyes as she laid out diagrams over her table. "They're not just stealing your water," she said, pointing to colored lines crossing a neighborhood map. "They've done an entire underground system branching off from 6 properties to water their gardens and fill that ridiculous decorative pond." Marcus touched another spot. And look who benefit the most, all 5 board members. Properties have excellent views and access, Eleanor nodded firmly. They've been playing this game for years, remember? The heritage oak removal. The playground move always working for the same properties, citing community interests. My phone buzzed with an incoming HOA email dues are increasing again to pay for landscape irrigation upgrades. This is ridiculous, I complained, displaying them. The text Eleanor reviewed her intricate chart, then smiled marginally. You know what's odd about water? It always flows to the lowest spot. Unless redirected, meaning she indicated towards a topographical overlay. The HOA office still sits in the bottom of a natural low spot without their fancy redirection system. Guess where all this rainwater would naturally run? Marcus smiled right into their valuable building. I'm not insinuating anything, Eleanor said. Her innocent smile veiled by the glint of her eye, she pushed elaborate blueprints of the diversion system around the table. But theoretically speaking, if someone were to manipulate these points of connection next time, there is a major rain. My heart leapt to the repercussions. Wouldn't they just trace it back to us? Eleanor shook her head. That's the benefit of water. When their system breaks, it will just be going back to its natural way of flowing nature, taking its course as if on cue. My weather app alert sounded the biggest storm system in 5 years was heading our way, expected to hit this weekend. By happenstance, the HOA had scheduled their annual garden show for Sunday afternoon. I glanced amongst my new acquaintances, a plan forming. What exactly would these changes involve? Eleanor's smile increased as she began sketching diagrams on new paper, depicting pipe connections and flow dynamics in language. Even I could grasp for the first time since my discovery of those diversion pipes that night. I'd been sent another notice of violation this time, saying my rain barrels detracted from neighborhood standards of beauty. The fine was now doubled to $600. I filed the notice among the others, with careful, a weird calmness spreading over me. Mrs. Reynolds had no clue what was about to hit her. Dark clouds massing as I dragged supplies into my garage. Friday evening, Eleanor had provided detailed instructions and specially designed pipe sections, which would redirect the water back to its natural flow pattern. Marcus coordinated everything, while his teenage son served as lookout at the living room window. 6-hour installation time during the storm. Marcus kept saying, tick things off our list. You'll need waterproof gear. A car crept by, slow front of my house, we froze until it went. Mrs. Reynolds has been driving past regularly. I told her she thinks something. Of course she does, Eleanor replied, accompanying us with the newly laminated diagrams safe from the impending rain. That's why we're proceeding with Phase 2 as well. Phase 2 was Marcus's input, documenting his daughter Zoe. A journalism student had helped us in gathering a detailed report on the HOA's suspicious activities, like water diversion, selective enforcement, and financial imbalances in landscaping contracts on a regular basis, awarded to Ms. Reynolds' brother-in-law's company. We'll be distributing these at the emergency meeting. They'll certainly call one after the storm. Marcus explained, showing me the folder of evidence Eleanor submitted water rights complaints with the county already. But would it be sufficient? I worried the HOA board had ridden roughshod over complaints previously. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. That's where your neighbor Diane comes into the picture. Diane worked for the local news station. She'd been quietly accumulating video of the HOA's water siphon system and had lined up a news van to coincidentally be reporting storm damage in our neighborhood. Sunday afternoon, the scheme was complete, but everything hinged on my role, physically modifying the diversion system at the height of the storm. When visibility would be poorest, rain began falling as we finished preparations. The weather forecast now predicted over 4 inches, enough to flood storm drains. Under normal circumstances, with our changes, the water would follow gravity's pull directly to the HOA office. Remember, Eleanor cautioned as they were prepared to leave. You're not constructing anything new. You're simply removing their man-made detours and permitting nature to retake its course. I slept precious little that evening, listening to the increasingly heavy rainfall by 3:00 a.m. It was absolute. I dressed in Dawn waterproof overalls, boots, and a black rain jacket, then snuck into my backyard with waterproof headlamp and Eleanor's gear. The storm had ideal cover. Lightning flashes illuminated my work briefly, while thunder drowned out any noise I discovered. The principal junction box Eleanor had indicated where 6 properties diversions connected into the community garden system. My hands trembled as I replaced the directional valve with Eleanor's experimentally altered equivalent. This new valve would appear identical, but would fail incrementally as water pressure rose, returning flow to its natural downhill run. 3 additional junction points required such adjustments. Water already pulled up around my ankles as I struggled with the final connection near the property line, out of the blue headlights, scanned the roadway. I put out my lamp and pressed myself against the ground behind shrubs. Mrs. Reynolds' SUV eased past windshield wipers, fighting the torrent she seemed to be driving through the neighborhood. Despite the dangerous weather, after I got by her, I rushed to finish the final connection and came back to my garage, heart pounding by dawn. The tempest was in full rage. Watching from my window, I saw water gushing exactly as Eleanor had precedingly directed to the community garden. But looking for the bottom of elevation in the neighborhood, the HOA office, I made coffee and waited occasionally looking at the security camera I'd placed toward the street at 8:17 a.m. Miss Reynolds' SUV splashed through what is now a huge stream down our road. She stopped in front of the HOA office and exited immediately, sinking up to her ankles in churning water. The expression on her face as she waited in front of the office door was exactly what I'd imagined. With binoculars, I saw her struggle with keys, finally forcing the door open, only to have a little wave meet her exiting out of within 30 minutes. Her panicked calls brought the entire board to the site. They arrived in luxury vehicles that now needed to be left a block away due to rising water. Even where I was standing, I could hear Miss Reynolds screaming accusations by noon. The rain subsided. My phone rang with an emergency HOA meeting notice at 3 p.m. at the community center. The office being out of commission due to water damage, Marcus texted. It worked great. Diane's news band is filming by chance flood damage on Oak Street, Eleanor added. Bring your violation notices and checkbook records. Showtime, I went to the community center to find it. Full homeowners who normally ignored meetings had arrived curious about the flooded office and starved for drama. Mrs. Reynolds was at the front, hair still damp, struggling to maintain composure. This emergency session addresses catastrophic flooding of association property. She began voice-taught with managed anger. Preliminary investigation reveals intentional tampering with our water management system. Her gaze swept the room, then fell upon me. Some individuals who were recently cited for offenses may have engaged in sabotage gossip ran through the crowd. I remained serious. This is clearly an attack aimed at her. She continued as she pointed to wet papers scattered on tables. Our insurance requires a police report for vandalism claims. Just as she pointed her finger directly at me, Eleanor stood up from her front row seat. Actually, Miss Reynolds. She stood out in distinct projection. I've brought evidence that may interest everyone here. It's tonight or never, Marcus breathed, as we huddled under his garage. Overhang rain pounded the pavement like tiny missiles forming rivers along the curbs. Perfect conditions, I cinched the hood of my raincoat tighter and nodded. Eleanor's modifications complete, Marcus lined his waterproof bag. 6 redirector valves and master control switch installed. Once gravity does the rest, my heart thundered against my ribs while we slid between houses. Storm's din shrouded our movements as we identified the first disguised diversion pipe behind my azalea bushes. Marcus moved briskly, his hands firm spite of downpour, installing Eleanor's customized version, replacing HOA's illegal valve, remember? He'd said we're not bringing anything new on board, we're merely eliminating their illicit system and allowing water to flow naturally. We worked house to house using Eleanor's map. Mrs. Jameson's old property was especially difficult. The HOA had buried their pipes beneath her prize rose bushes. Lightning flashed overhead as we carefully navigated around her plants. Last one Marcus called at house 6. Once I flip this master switch, the entire system reverts to natural drainage. I hesitated. What if we get caught? Do you want your water back or not? His eyes flashed with challenge. The switch clicked with surprising quietness for something so important. Now we wait, I said. Sleep eluded me that night. I saw water running, accumulating, finding its downhill path to the lowest point in Pinnerest Village, lying directly under the HOA office. Dawn broke with extraordinary brightness, following the storm. I looked out from my blinds to observe neighbors congregating at the terminus of our street, pointing and chattering energetically. Reaching for my coffee, I walked slowly down to catch up with them. Never seen anything like it," said Tom 2 doors down. "The whole office is sitting in a lake. In fact, water surrounded the single-story HOA building, halfway up the door. The precious community garden beside it, the one they'd stolen our water to maintain, now resembled a swamp." A black SUV skidded to a stop at the water's edge, and Ms. Reynolds emerged, designer boots splashing into the puddle. Before she realized its depth, her shriek echoing over the water. "Simone, call the emergency services," she demanded to the crowd assembling. "This is vandalism, property destruction." I drink my coffee, looks like drainage issues to me. Maybe someone should have talked with an able engineer before reorganizing the neighborhood's natural waterway. Her eyes fixed on me. This is your fault." Before I could utter a word, Eleanor stood next to me, camera in hand, snapping photos of the flood. "For the Homeowners Association files," she said with a smile. "Also, I've invited Channel 5 News. They're doing a special on water rights abuses in suburban neighborhoods," and Ms. Reynolds blanched. "You wouldn't dream of the county water authority seemed quite interested in my call this morning." Eleanor continued, especially about unpermitted water diversion affecting several properties. A news van pulled up behind us, a reporter and cameraman quickly setting up equipment. Emergency meeting, community center. 1 hour, Ms. Reynolds made sloshing back into her car. I gave a secret smile to Marcus and Eleanor. Phase 1 done. The community center resounded with furious discussions. When I arrived, almost every homeowner had appeared unprecedented for an HOA meeting. I slipped into a seat between Marcus and Eleanor, who had spread her documentation across 3 chairs. Ms. Reynolds tapped the microphone. "This emergency session will address the unfortunate flooding incident and necessary repairs." "And who's paying for these repairs?" shouted someone in the back. "Our insurance will cover. Why was our office in a flood zone to begin with?" Interrupted another voice. Mrs. Reynolds fidgeted with her pearl necklace. "Nervously, natural drainage patterns which you changed," Eleanor shouted out, standing. Slowly, the room fell silent. "I've brought proof that may be of interest to everyone. This isn't the time." Ms. Reynolds started show us. Multiple voices insisted. Eleanor spread out big property maps on the front table. "These are the original drainage schemes for Pinehurst Village, sanctioned by the county 15 years ago." She traced over another clear sheet. "And these are the unauthorized changes introduced by the present board in the past 3 years." Gasps and murmurs filled the air. The HOA has methodically diverted water from 6 properties. Eleanor went on, gesturing to my house, and 5 others, all to serve their unauthorized garden scheme and decorative pond. "That's absurd," Ms. Reynolds spluttered. "We've enhanced community beauty at the expense of stolen water," I said, standing next to Eleanor. "Water you collected from my collection system after finding me for having it installed and mine added." Mrs. Jameson rising unsteadily on her cane. "My garden passed away." The Channel 5 reporter was writing frantically in the back. Also, Marcus included, leaving with a folder. "I've gotten the financial statements of HOA money used on this illegal system. $2,700 of our assessments." The room burst into outrage. "What happened last night," I said, plainly over the din, "was just nature taking back its path when these illegal changes broke down in the storm." Mrs. Reynolds' face contorted with anger. "You hijacked our system. That's a crime harm." The HOA attorney, who had been so silent, leaned forward to inform her in a whispered voice. Almost to her face, her anger turned to fear, that we may have constructed without proper permits. She grudgingly agreed, might have Eleanor raised an eyebrow, gliding a letter across the table. "The county water utility doesn't agree." They're opening an official inquiry as the meeting broke down. I caught the eye of Marcus. His tiny nod told me what I already knew, that this was far from finished. A reporter approached me as the crowd gathered around Ms. Reynolds. "Sir, would you say this is a new trend of HOA overreach in your area?" I smiled, knowing my following sentences would be on the evening news. "I simply wanted to collect rainwater. I never thought I'd find a flood of corruption 48 hours after the flood." My doorbell rang at 7:15 a.m. 2 men in suits stood on my porch badges. In hand, Mr. Davis County Water Authority. We'd like to have some questions from you about the recent incident at Pinnerus Village. My mouth went dry. I invited them in, trying to hold my hands from shaking as I poured coffee. Am I being investigated? I asked outright the taller of the two investigators. Hansen shook his head. We're looking into unauthorized water diversion. Your name was given as someone who might have information that's relevant. Relief swept over me. I have a lot to say for the next hour. I explained everything about my rain barrels, the suspicious emptiness catching Miss Reynolds. Your assistant the second investigator Rodriguez, I just say my words carefully. I believe that the vision drowned out the she makes this making it break. Yeah, you are so derpy and rested it out. So they gone to it when I never with it. The hours Hansen so he changed. The special no, this valve is showdown to have a figure that into your first place. I had no miss for any water version. For one, the vendor was for crowded then befaring as Reynolds stood behind the podium looking Ryan. That's why he has much makeup and wrinkled boys. We call it jobs has a matching mate go there is the night criminal conspiracy in our community. Ocean. Must not make was on the flood, and we have a video tape of and choosers the opening of on the heat on guests have in the road through. I could see Marcus the FBG we begin its option you evolve from the log to pick and a look man the crystal man says it yes get it so forward I and this the little security folder into after Twee makes it any concern. She turns to a real see how that my office has reviewed evidence of very little water. You play on misuse of few pheasants and regard falsification current board. She places the folder on the tablet. He says and audit of 37 homeowners Abilene since the Avery's Eleanor she thinks it's me some sort of who roam as forth of a assistlism during the fullest and any changes made to and already illegal the system would be considered so a move would have an hip to meet the structure just can be prayed. It doesn't take a ladder here without us who has going to maintenance nerds property value real estate integrated reposite of as facility stand for. Judge listed admitted it proposing an interim committee until elections again more volunteers hating the shut up wearing to the podium duper security officer. Mr. Sakins as the escort to the porch. The home began a also clip like a lady is the flaws very reacting latter. I locked the seat. The scene of the flood damage had had a great day and opportunity on our most needed renovations, including keeping a heating to mesh transparency board showing a financial aid. Gildy been fan knew that everyone is doing the yard marks drive next with no dupe quarter you see reports that in 30% over since installing the neighborhood-wide collection system. I smiled as neighbors filtered in for our first official meeting. The interim committee had worked so hard to restore confidence tonight. We'd be voting on new bylaws, emphasizing sustainability and fairness. A far cry from when we began, Marcus saw a familiar SUV roll into parking lot. Ms. Reynolds arrived subdued, clad in casuals instead of her trademarked powers. Trouble suits trouble. Marcus growled, let's see. I said, exiting from the car. She approached me quietly. I came to obtain this. She handed me a check. Your fined amounts plus interest, thanks? She paused for a second. The DA had offered her community service, rather than being charged if I would assist the investigation with board misconduct. I nodded, not understanding what she was asking from me. I've been assigned to help with the new rainwater harvesting systems, she said, wincing. They said you're the expert I'm supposed to talk to. The irony was not lost on me. I could send her away. Bask in this victory. The committee meets Tuesdays at 6. I said instead, bring rubber boots, we get dirty. She shocked look was worth everything that night as the meeting ended with unanimous approval of our new water sharing program. I stepped outside to inspect my rain barrels. They sat full and ready for the coming dry season in front of me. On the opposite side of the street, I saw new barrels being installed on 3 homes. Beyond them, the community garden flourished with vegetables and flowers. Children played at the new splash pad, built where Miss Reynolds' decorative pond used to be a much more practical application of water here in our clime. Eleanor accompanied me to watch the sunset. You know what people say about water? What's that? It always levels. It finds in the end. She patted my shoulder, like justice in my driveway. My first rain barrels were beset by the last golden light. They were plain things, just plastic buckets made to hold what is given by the sky. Who would have expected? They would root out corruption and unite a community.